Hello, and welcome to Mythos and Logos. Here is a paradox to consider. The oldest story ever written is about the fear of being forgotten. The most ancient of epics, carved into clay tablets 4,000 years ago, tells of a king who built mighty walls and performed legendary deeds, all while trembling at the thought that his name might vanish like smoke on the wind. Yet, in his very fear of oblivion, Gilgamesh achieved the immortality he sought, though not in the way he imagined. His story has outlasted the civilization that created it, the language in which it was first sung, and the empire that preserved it. The epic that begins with the words, "I will proclaim to the world the deeds of Gilgamesh," has done exactly that, across 4 millennia and counting. Tonight, we journey into the world's oldest literary masterpiece, a story that contains within its ancient verses the seeds of every epic that would follow. We will walk the streets of Uruk when its walls gleamed like burnished copper, stand in the cedar forest where gods themselves feared to tread, and cross the waters of death in search of answers to humanity's eternal questions. Before we jump in, clicking like and subscribe would mean the world to me. It's the clearest way to tell me to keep making these videos. I appreciate each of you. Also, since we span so many time zones, I'm curious where everyone's watching from and what time it is there. Feel time's current reversing, pulling you gently into ancient Mesopotamia, 5,000 years ago, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers run brown with fertile silt, where the first cities rise from the alluvial plain, like dreams made solid in mud brick and bitumen, where the air shimmers with heat and possibility, and where a king named Gilgamesh rules the greatest city in the world. The library beneath the sand. The year was 1872, and in a dimly lit room of the British Museum, a young Assyriologist named George Smith was bent over a clay tablet, his fingers tracing the wedge-shaped marks pressed into its surface 3,000 years before. Smith was cataloguing the thousands of cuneiform tablets that had arrived from Austin Henry Layard's excavations at Nineveh, the ancient Assyrian capital. Most days, this meant recording receipts for barley, lists of omens, or royal proclamations that had lost their urgency millennia ago. But on this particular November afternoon, as London fog pressed against the windows and gaslight flickered across the ancient clay, Smith realised he was reading something extraordinary. The tablet before him, which would come to be known as Tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, was telling a story that Smith recognised, with a shock that made him leap from his chair. Here, in Akkadian cuneiform, was an account of a great flood that had destroyed all mankind, save for one righteous man who had built an ark on divine instruction, loaded it with animals, and rode out the deluge until he could release birds to search for dry land. The similarities to the biblical flood narrative were unmistakable, but this version predated the Hebrew scriptures by more than 1,000 years. Smith's excitement was so intense that, according to witnesses, he jumped up and rushed about the room in a state of undress, so overwhelmed was he by the magnitude of his discovery. What he had found was not merely a parallel to a biblical story, but a window into a literary tradition so ancient that it preceded almost all written narrative. The tablet was part of a larger epic, one that had been copied and recopied, translated and retranslated across 2,000 years of Mesopotamian history before vanishing into the sand when the last cuneiform scribes set down their styluses. The British Museum, recognising the significance of Smith's discovery, sent him to Nineveh to search for the missing portions of the epic. Against astronomical odds, within just 5 days of digging, Smith found the missing section of the flood tablet, a 17-line passage that had broken off from the very tablet he had been reading in London. It was as if the ancient story itself was eager to be whole again, to be heard after its long silence. But the flood narrative was only one part of a much grander tale. As more tablets were discovered and translated, the full scope of the Epic of Gilgamesh began to emerge. Here was a story of friendship so profound it could challenge the gods, of adventures that spanned from the depths of the ocean to the heights of heaven, of a quest for immortality that would end in the acceptance of death. It was a narrative of such psychological sophistication and emotional depth that it seemed impossible it could have been composed at the dawn of written literature. The tablets themselves told a story beyond their content. They came from the library of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria, who had assembled in 7th century BCE Nineveh, the ancient world's most comprehensive collection of cuneiform literature. Ashurbanipal, unlike many rulers who collected only contemporary works to glorify their reigns, had sent scribes throughout Mesopotamia to copy texts that were already ancient in his time. The Epic of Gilgamesh that his scribes copied was itself a compilation of even older stories, reaching back through Babylonian versions to Sumerian poems that may have been first composed when writing itself was young. Walls of lapis lazuli. You stand at the great gate of Uruk as dawn breaks over the Mesopotamian plain. The city walls tower above you, their baked brick faces catching the first light of day and glowing like burnished gold. These are the walls that Gilgamesh built, a circuit of 6 miles that embraces not just the city, but its date palm gardens, its irrigation canals, and the great temple precinct of Anu and Ishtar. Your hand reaches out to touch the warm brick, and you can feel the slight indentations where countless other hands have touched this same spot across 5,000 years. The morning air carries the scent of baking bread from the ovens near the gate, mixing with the earthier smell of the river and the sweet perfume of flowering date palms. Guards stand at attention, their bronze spear points catching the light, their eyes scanning the horizon where merchant caravans approach along the road from Ur. You pass beneath the gate's massive cedar beams, timber that was brought at enormous expense from the far mountains of Lebanon, and enter the awakening city. The streets are already filling with life. Water carriers balance ceramic jars on their shoulders, their rhythmic calls announcing their presence. A priest in white linen hurries past, heading for the dawn rituals at the temple. Children chase each other between the market stalls that are just beginning to open, their laughter echoing off the narrow walls of the residential quarter. The city is laid out in districts, each with its own character. The temple precinct with its soaring ziggurat, the palace complex with its glazed brick facades, the merchants' quarter with its warehouses and accounting houses, where scribes are already pressing their reed styluses into soft clay. You climb the great stairway that leads to the top of the city wall, your legs burning with the effort, until you stand upon the broad walkway where guards patrol. From here, you can see the entire city spread below you like a living map. The Euphrates glitters in the morning sun, its waters divided into countless irrigation channels that thread between gardens and fields. The great temple of Anu rises from the city's heart, its staged tower reaching toward heaven, each level painted a different color: black, white, red, blue, orange, silver, and finally, at the top, the gold-leafed shrine that houses the god himself. But it is not just the architecture that takes your breath away, it is the sheer audacity of this place, this first great city carved from the hostile desert by human will and ingenuity. Where once there was only wind-blown dust and sparse vegetation, now there are markets where merchants trade goods from the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean. Where once nomadic tribes followed their flocks, now there are schools where children learn to write, courts where laws are administered, workshops where artisans create objects of breathtaking beauty. This is Gilgamesh's city, and everywhere you see the marks of his ambition, the walls are not merely functional fortifications, but statements of power and permanence. The temples are not just places of worship, but monuments to the king's relationship with the divine. Even the epic that bears his name, which the court poets sing in the palace halls, and the common storytellers recite in the market squares, is part of his grand design to be remembered forever. The historical shadow. Who was Gilgamesh? The question seems simple until we realize we are asking about a figure who exists at the intersection of history and myth, a king who may have lived around 2700 BCE, but whose life was already legendary by the time the first stories about him were written down 400 years later. The Sumerian king list, that curious document that blends mythical prehistory with historical record, states, matter-of-factly, that Gilgamesh was the 5th king of Uruk's first dynasty, that his father was a phantom and that he ruled for 126 years. Such claims place him in that liminal space where archaeology and legend meet, where we must sift through layers of story to find kernels of historical truth. The city of Uruk itself is undeniably real. Its ruins, known today as Walker, lie in southern Iraq, and archaeologists have been excavating them since the 19th century. They have found the massive walls that tradition attributes to Gilgamesh, walls that were indeed built in the early dynastic period when he would have lived. They have uncovered the temple precincts of Anu and Ishtar that feature so prominently in the epic. They have even found inscriptions mentioning Gilgamesh, though these come from centuries after his supposed lifetime, when he was already being worshipped as a god of the netherworld. The transformation of Gilgamesh from king to legend to god follows a pattern common in Mesopotamian culture. Great rulers, especially those from the distant past, accumulated stories around themselves like planets gathering moons. But Gilgamesh seems to have attracted more stories than most, perhaps because his reign coincided with a crucial period in Mesopotamian history. This was the age when the Sumerian city-states were reaching their cultural zenith, when writing was evolving from simple accounting to complex narrative, when the templates for kingship, law, and urban civilization were being established. Archaeological evidence suggests that the historical Gilgamesh presided over a period of expansion and consolidation for Uruk. The city's influence extended throughout southern Mesopotamia, and its cultural innovations, particularly in writing and administration, spread even farther. Trade goods from Uruk have been found from Iran to Syria, indicating a network of commercial relationships that would have required strong leadership to maintain. The walls themselves, which required millions of bricks and thousands of labourers to construct, speak to a ruler with exceptional organisational abilities and resources. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence for a historical Gilgamesh comes from other Mesopotamian texts that mention him in passing. A poem about the god Enlil refers to Gilgamesh rebuilding the sanctuary of Nippur after a flood. Another text mentions him in a list of divine judges in the netherworld. Most tellingly, several rulers from the subsequent early dynastic period claim descent from Gilgamesh or invoke his name in their royal inscriptions. 1. Utu-Hengel, who liberated Sumer from foreign rule around 2100 BCE, explicitly compared himself to Gilgamesh and claimed to be completing the ancient king's unfinished works. The process by which this historical king became the hero of epic poetry is itself a fascinating study in cultural memory. The earliest Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh, composed perhaps 400 years after his death, already show him as a figure larger than life, performing impossible deeds and interacting with gods. By the Old Babylonian period, around 1800 BCE, these separate poems had been woven together into a continuous narrative, though one still quite different from the version we know best. Finally, probably around 1100 BCE, a scholar priest named Sin-Lechi Unini created what became the standard version of the epic, the one copied in Ashurbanipal's library and discovered by George Smith. Each retelling added layers to the story, while perhaps preserving genuine memories of the historical king. The epic's emphasis on wall building, for instance, may reflect actual construction projects. The tension between Gilgamesh and the city assembly that appears in some versions might echo real political conflicts of the early dynastic period. Even the strange detail that Gilgamesh was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, mathematically impossible but mythologically resonant, might preserve memory of a ruler who claimed divine ancestry while acknowledging human limitations. Cuneiform dreams. The physical form of the Epic of Gilgamesh is itself a marvel that demands our attention. Unlike the singular texts we associate with ancient literature, the Iliad or the Aeneid transcribed on papyrus or parchment, the epic exists in multiple versions, spread across thousands of clay tablets, each one a unique artifact bearing the fingerprints, literally, of its ancient scribe. To understand the epic, we must first understand the extraordinary medium in which it was preserved and the scribal tradition that maintained it across 2 millennia. Cuneiform writing, humanity's first writing system, emerged in southern Mesopotamia around 3200 BCE, initially as a means of recording economic transactions. The earliest tablets are receipts and inventories, lists of sheep and measures of barley, the mundane bookkeeping of temple administrators. But within a few centuries, scribes realized that these wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay could capture not just quantities, but qualities, not just things, but thoughts. By the time of the historical Gilgamesh, writing had evolved to the point where it could record narrative, and by the time the first Gilgamesh stories were written down, it had become a sophisticated vehicle for literary expression. The creation of a cuneiform tablet was both an art and a craft. The scribe would first prepare the clay, mixing fine river silt with water to achieve the perfect consistency, neither too wet nor too dry. The tablet would be shaped, usually into a rectangle that fit comfortably in the hand, with rounded edges and a slightly convex surface that prevented cracking as it dried. Then, using a reed stylus cut at an angle, the scribe would press wedges into the soft clay, combining them into the complex signs that represented words, syllables, and concepts. A skilled scribe could write with remarkable speed and beauty, the wedges flowing across the tablet in neat rows, each sign perfectly formed and positioned. The various versions of the epic that have survived show us how the story evolved through different periods and cultures. The earliest Sumerian poems, written around 2100 BCE, are independent tales: Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven, Gilgamesh and the Cedar Forest, Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the Netherworld. Each tells a complete story, and while they share characters and themes, they were not yet integrated into a single narrative. These Sumerian versions preserve what may be the oldest strata of the tradition, possibly including authentic memories from the 3rd millennium BCE. The Old Babylonian version, dating to around 1800 to 1600 BCE, represents a crucial transformation. Here, for the first time, the separate tales have been woven into a continuous narrative with a clear beginning, middle, and end. This version, known primarily from tablets found at Sippar, adds psychological depth to the characters and introduces the theme of mortality that would become central to later versions. It is in the Old Babylonian version that we first see Enkidu's death as the catalyst for Gilgamesh's quest for immortality, transforming what had been heroic adventures into a profound meditation on human existence. The Middle Babylonian period, roughly 1500 to 1000 BCE, saw the epic spread beyond Mesopotamia proper. Versions in Akkadian have been found at Hattusa, the Hittite capital in Anatolia, at Ugarit on the Syrian coast, and at Amarna in Egypt. Each of these versions shows local adaptations, with scribes sometimes adding explanatory notes for foreign audiences or adjusting divine names to fit local pantheons. A particularly fascinating fragment from Megiddo in Canaan shows the epic being used as a scribal exercise, with a student's clumsy attempts at copying the text and a teacher's corrections in the margins. But it is the standard Babylonian version, attributed to the scholar Sin-Lachi-Unninni, that represents the epic's final and most influential form. This version, composed around 1100 BCE, is the one that was copied and recopied for the next 1,000 years, the one that filled Ashurbanipal's library, the one that George Smith discovered. Sin-Lachi-Unninni was more than a compiler. He was a creative editor who transformed his sources into a literary masterpiece. He added the profound prologue that frames the entire epic as ancient wisdom worth preserving. He restructured the narrative to create parallel scenes and thematic echoes. Most importantly, he deepened the philosophical dimensions of the story, making Gilgamesh's journey not just a series of adventures, but a universal human experience. The physical distribution of these tablets tells its own story about the epic's importance. Copies have been found in palace libraries, temple schools, and private collections. Some are beautiful library editions, written in elegant script on perfectly formed tablets. Others are student exercises, with spelling mistakes and clumsy handwriting. Some tablets include glossaries, translating difficult Sumerian terms into Akkadian for readers who could no longer understand the ancient language. Others have colophons, notes from scribes identifying themselves, and sometimes adding personal comments about the text they were copying. He who saw the deep. The opening lines of the Epic of Gilgamesh accomplish something remarkable. They frame the story we are about to hear as both ancient history and immediate experience, as both a tale of long ago and a wisdom that transcends time. He who saw the deep, the epic begins, using a Babylonian phrase that means not just the physical abyss of the ocean, but the fundamental mysteries of existence. Gilgamesh is introduced, not first as a king or warrior, but as one who has gained profound knowledge through suffering, who has returned from a journey beyond the boundaries of human experience to share what he has learned. These first lines, likely composed by Sinlechi Unini as a frame for the older narrative, establish the epic's dual nature as both entertainment and wisdom literature. We are told that Gilgamesh brought back information from before the flood, that he restored cult centers destroyed by the deluge, that he inscribed his experiences on a stone tablet and deposited it in the walls of Uruk for future generations to discover. The epic thus presents itself as a recovered document, a message from the deep past that has been preserved through extraordinary effort for our benefit. The prologue continues with a literary device that would be impossible in oral poetry, but perfectly suited to written text. It instructs us to examine the walls of Uruk ourselves, to climb the ancient rampart and walk about, to find the copper tablet box hidden in the foundations and read the lapis lazuli tablet within. This direct address creates an immediate connection between reader and story, collapsing the millennia between us and ancient Mesopotamia. We become archaeologists of meaning, searching for wisdom hidden in the very structure of civilization. But then the epic shifts focus to describe Gilgamesh himself, and here we encounter one of the most mysterious and significant details in all of ancient literature. Gilgamesh, we are told, is 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. The mathematical impossibility of this fraction has puzzled scholars for generations. How can someone be 2/3 of one thing and 1/3 of another? Various explanations have been proposed. Perhaps it refers to a special method of divine conception, or to Gilgamesh having 2 divine parents and 1 human wet nurse, or perhaps it is meant to signify that he transcends normal categories. The most compelling interpretation, however, is that this impossible fraction expresses a fundamental truth about Gilgamesh's nature and the human condition itself. He is more than human, but not quite divine, caught in an unbearable middle space between mortality and immortality. This mathematical paradox embodies the central tension of the epic. Gilgamesh possesses superhuman strength and semi-divine status, yet he remains subject to death. He can perform feats beyond mortal capability, yet he cannot escape mortal fate. The impossible fraction is a perfect expression of an impossible existence. The description of Gilgamesh that follows is remarkably physical and sensual. He is beautiful like a god, his body perfectly proportioned, his strength unmatched. But alongside this divine beauty, we learn of very human behaviours. He exhausts the young men of Uruk with constant athletic contests, he claims first rights. With new brides, he allows no son to remain with his father because of his endless demands for labour and service. The epic does not shy away from presenting its hero as initially flawed, even tyrannical. This is not the idealised hero of later epic traditions, but a complex figure whose greatness is inseparable from his failings. The citizens of Uruk cry out to the gods for relief from their king's oppression, and their lament introduces one of the epic's most important themes, the need for balance and companionship. Gilgamesh's problem is not just that he is tyrannical, but that he is alone, without an equal to channel his tremendous energies. He is like a wild bull among cattle, a lion among sheep. His very superiority makes him a burden to his people and ultimately to himself. The god's solution will not be to diminish Gilgamesh, but to create someone who can match him, friend, and rival combined. The tyrant's burden. Before dawn, Gilgamesh stands alone on the highest platform of the ziggurat, watching the stars fade into the lightening sky. Sleep eludes him again, as it has so many nights before. Below, his city begins to stir, but up here, in the thin air between earth and heaven, he feels the weight of his isolation most keenly. The priest will arrive soon with the morning offerings, but for now, there is only the king and the infinite spaces between the stars. In the royal gymnasium, as the sun rises, he summons the young men of the nobility for wrestling practice. They come reluctantly, knowing what awaits them. Gilgamesh throws them one after another, his massive hands finding purchase on oiled skin, his supernatural strength making mockery of their best efforts. When one manages to last longer than usual, showing genuine skill and courage, the king's eyes light with momentary hope, but then he pins the youth with casual ease, and the light dies. He dismisses them with barely concealed disgust, not at their weakness, but at the reminder of his own impossibility. The throne room fills with petitioners as morning advances. A merchant disputes a contract. Two brothers argue over their father's fields. A widow seeks justice for her murdered husband. Gilgamesh listens with half his attention, his judgment swift and generally just. But his mind wanders to the horizon, to the mountains where adventures worthy of his strength might wait. When a young scribe accidentally drops his tablet, shattering it on the stone floor, the entire court holds its breath, expecting the king's famous rage. But Gilgamesh merely waves his hand in dismissal, too weary even for anger. At midday, he visits the wall construction, where thousands labour in the crushing heat to complete his great project. The overseer shows him the latest section, explaining how they have solved a problem with water seepage that threatened the foundation. Gilgamesh examines the work with genuine interest, his mind engaging fully for the first time today. This wall will outlast him, outlast his name, outlast perhaps even the memory of the gods themselves. In brick and bitumen, he seeks what his divine blood cannot grant: permanence. As evening approaches, a wedding procession winds through the streets. Custom demands that the king take the bride first, a tradition as old as the city itself, they say. Though in truth, Gilgamesh himself instituted it in his desperate search for connection, for something that might pierce the veil of his isolation. But as he looks at the bride's terrified face, at the groom's carefully controlled rage, he feels only emptiness. He goes through the motions of the ritual, but there is no joy in it, no satisfaction, only the hollow echo of power exercised because it can be. Night falls, and still Gilgamesh cannot sleep. He walks the palace corridors, startling guards who snap to attention, passing chambers where his courtiers lie with their families, surrounded by the warm comfort of ordinary mortal life. In the tablet room, he finds an old scribe still working by oil lamplight, copying an ancient hymn. The man's hands shake with age, but his script remains steady. Gilgamesh watches in silence, envying the scribe's simple concentration, his ability to lose himself in the routine of work, the blessed escape of mortal limitations. When the scribe finally notices the king and attempts to rise and bow, Gilgamesh stops him with a gesture and retreats back into the shadows, back to his splendid, unbearable solitude. Clay and destiny. In the realm of the gods, where thoughts become reality and words reshape the world, the great mother goddess Uruk washes her hands in a bowl of sacred water brought from the Abzu, the freshwater ocean that lies beneath the earth. The gods have come to her with an unusual request, born from the desperate prayers of Uruk's citizens. Create someone, they have asked, who can match Gilgamesh in strength and spirit, a companion who might temper his restless energy and give his great heart something worthy to love. Uruk remembers the creation of mankind itself, when she and the god Ea fashioned humans from clay and divine spittle to serve as workers for the gods. But this new creation requires something different, something unique. She reaches into the bowl and pulls out not ordinary clay, but the primordial mud from the world's foundation, the same substance from which she formed the first humans in the time before time. As she works it in her hands, she conceives in her mind the image of Anu, the sky god himself, but inverted, earthbound, wild. The clay takes shape beneath her fingers, a man, but not like the civilized humans who dwell in cities. This one will be as humanity was meant to be, before cities and kings, before writing and law, before the complexities that have made Gilgamesh so impossibly isolated. She forms powerful limbs, capable of running with the gazelles, hands that will never hold a stylus or a cup of beer, eyes that will see the world with animal clarity. Into this clay figure, she breathes not just life, but a special kind of innocence, a purity of being that civilization has long since abandoned. With a motion like casting seed, Uruk throws the clay figure out into the world. It arcs through the dimensions, from divine realm to mortal earth, and lands far from any city, in the pristine grasslands where the wild herds roam. The impact sends ripples through fate itself, though no mortal observes this miraculous arrival. Where the clay touches earth, it transforms into living flesh. Enkidu is born fully grown, his body covered with hair, like an animal's, his mind unmarked by language or custom. He rises from the grass, confused but unafraid, naked but feeling no shame, alone but not understanding loneliness. The gazelles grazing nearby look up at this strange new creature, and when Enkidu drops to all fours and approaches them slowly, they accept him as one of their own. He learns to graze on grass and herbs, to drink at the watering holes by sucking water directly like the beasts, to sleep pressed against warm animal bodies under the vast ceiling of stars. His hair grows long and matted, becoming like a woman's hair, the epic tells us, though no woman's hair was ever so wild and free. Days blur into seasons in this wordless paradise. Enkidu runs with the gazelles across endless grasslands, his powerful legs matching their pace, his lungs drawing in the pure air of the wilderness. He protects the young animals from predators, using his human cunning combined with animal instinct. He fills in the pits that hunters have dug, tears apart the nets they have spread, frees creatures from snares. To the animals, he is protector and companion. To the hunters, he becomes a mysterious menace, a wild man who undoes all their work. This is paradise as Mesopotamians understood it. Not a garden of eternal ease, but a state of harmony with the natural world, an existence free from the burdens of civilization, but also from its glories. Enkidu knows neither good nor evil, neither ambition nor despair. He does not question his existence, or yearn for something more. He simply is, moment to moment, season to season, as integrated with nature as the wind or rain. Yet in creating this perfect innocent, Uruk has also created someone fundamentally incomplete. For humanity, even wild humanity, carries within itself the seed of consciousness that must eventually bloom. Enkidu's destiny is not to remain in this animal paradise, but to journey toward awareness, toward friendship, toward mortality itself. The wild man's Eden. In the grasslands beyond the reach of any city's walls, where the horizon meets the sky in an unbroken line, and the wind carries no scent of bread or beer, Enkidu lives his wordless life among the beasts. The epic tells us he knew nothing of peopled land, that he ate grass with the gazelles and jostled at the waterhole with the animals. But to say he knew nothing is not quite accurate. Rather, he knew everything that mattered in that pristine world, possessed a knowledge older than writing, older than cities, as old as life itself, recognizing its own existence. His days follow the rhythm of the herds. Before dawn, when the air is cool and dew still clings to the grass, he rises with the gazelles from their sleeping grounds. They move together toward the watering places, alert to every sound, every shift in the wind that might carry the scent of predator. Enkidu has learned to read the landscape as the animals do, to sense the hidden lion by the way birds fall silent, to know that rain approaches by the particular heaviness in the air, to find water by following the flight patterns of doves. At the watering hole, a complex social order prevails that needs no laws or rulers to maintain. The gazelles drink first, then the wild asses, then the smaller creatures. Predators and prey maintain an uneasy truce at water's edge, an ancient agreement that transcends species. Enkidu takes his place in this order naturally, neither asserting dominance nor showing submission, simply existing within the pattern, as if he had always been part of it. When he drinks, He lowers his face to the water's surface like the animals, lapping with his tongue, his wild hair falling forward to create a curtain between him and the reflected sky. But there is a hunter who has observed this strange wild man, watching from hidden blinds as Enkidu tears apart his carefully constructed traps. This hunter, whose family has worked these hunting grounds for generations, finds his livelihood threatened by this creature, who seems neither fully human nor fully animal. Day after day, the hunter discovers his pits filled in, his nets torn, his snares destroyed. The animals that should be caught for the markets of Uruk run free, and the hunter's family begins to hunger. The hunter watches Enkidu from a distance, trying to understand what he is seeing. The wild man's strength is obvious, apparent in the ease with which he tears apart traps that would hold a lion. But there is something else, an aura of belonging that makes the hunter feel like an intruder in his own hunting grounds. When Enkidu moves with the herds, he becomes part of their flow, indistinguishable from them except for his upright stance. When he rests, animals that would flee from any other human approach him without fear, some even nuzzling against him as they would their own kind. Fear grows in the hunter's heart, not just fear of physical harm, but a deeper terror at this violation of the boundary between human and animal. He has heard stories of such beings in the old tales his grandmother told, creatures from the time before the Great Flood, when the world was different, when the borders between realms were less fixed. But to see such a being with his own eyes, to have his ordered world disrupted by this impossible existence, shakes him to his core. The hunter returns to his father, an old man, wise in the ways of both wilderness and civilization. He describes what he has seen, his voice trembling with the effort to put into words something that seems to defy language itself. His father listens carefully, nodding as if he had expected something like this, as if the appearance of wild men is simply part of the world's deeper pattern that city dwellers have forgotten. After long thought, the father speaks words that will change everything. Go to Uruk, find Gilgamesh the king, tell him of this wild man who might be the companion he unknowingly seeks. And ask the king for Shamhat, the temple woman, for only she has the power to bridge the gap between wildness and civilization. The hunter's journey to Uruk takes 3 days of hard walking, leaving behind the open grasslands for the irrigated fields that surround the city, trading the vast silence of the wilderness for the growing noise of human habitation. As he approaches the great walls, he rehearses what he will say to the king, how he will describe this being that defies description. But when he finally stands before Gilgamesh in the throne room, the words pour out of him in a rush, and the king leans forward with the first genuine interest he has shown in months. Here, at last, might be something worthy of his attention. Shamhat's sacred duty. You are Shamhat, priestess of Ishtar, and you walk the long road from Uruk toward the wilderness where the wild man dwells. The hunter guides you, but he maintains a respectful distance, understanding that what you are about to do is both sacred and dangerous. Your feet, accustomed to the smooth pavements of the temple precinct, struggle with the rough ground, but you do not complain. You have been chosen for this task by the king himself, selected from all the women who serve the goddess of love and war, and you understand that the fate of more than one soul hangs in the balance. The jewellery you wear, the golden earrings and lapis lazuli necklaces that mark your status as one of Ishtar's holy women, seem to grow heavier with each step away from civilization. Your fine linen robes, dyed the deep red of pomegranates, catch on thorns and gather dust from the path. But these are the tools of your trade, as much as a warrior's weapons or a scribe's stylus. You are not simply a woman going to seduce a wild man. You are civilization itself, walking in human form toward its opposite, carrying in your body the 10,000 years of human culture that separate the city from the wilderness. As you travel, you think about what you have been told of this Enkidu, trying to prepare yourself for an encounter unlike any in the traditional texts you studied in the temple. The sacred marriage ritual you perform each year with the king or his representative is a controlled ceremony, every gesture prescribed, every word scripted by centuries of tradition. But this will be different. This will be the raw essence of what that ritual represents, the fundamental power that draws humans together, that creates society from solitary beings, that transforms animal instinct into human connection. On the second day of travel, the landscape begins to change. The irrigated fields give way to untamed grassland, and you can feel the shift, like a change in the air pressure. The hunter grows nervous, constantly scanning the horizon, but you find yourself unexpectedly calm. Perhaps it is Ishtar's presence you feel, the goddess who rules over both the civilized arts of love and the wild passion that predates all civilization. In this moment, walking between worlds, you are her perfect embodiment. When you finally reach the watering hole, where Enkidu is known to come, the hunter helps you set up a simple shelter and then retreats to a safe distance. You wait through the afternoon, perfuming your skin with oils of myrrh and frankincense, arranging your hair in the elaborate style that takes 2 temple servants an hour to complete each morning. As the sun begins to sink toward the horizon, you hear them approaching, the sound of many hooves, the gentle bleating of animals, and among these sounds, something else, a presence that makes your skin prickle with awareness. You see him before he sees you. He moves with the gazelles, his body covered in hair, his movements fluid and unself-conscious. He is magnificent and terrifying, human in form, but animal in essence, exactly as you were told, but also nothing like what you expected. When the animals catch your scent and freeze, he freezes with them, his nostrils flaring as he processes this new smell. Human, female, perfumed with the oils of civilization. His eyes find you, and in them you see no recognition of what you are, only the wariness of a wild creature encountering something unknown. You speak his name, the name the gods gave him, though he does not yet know it himself. The sound of a human voice causes him to step backward, but something in your tone, perhaps, or in the ancient power you channel, keeps him from fleeing entirely. Slowly, with movements as careful and deliberate as those used to approach the altar of a dangerous god, you rise and step toward him. You let your outer robe fall, revealing skin that has never known the harsh sun of the wilderness, soft and pale as fresh cream, so different from his weather-darkened hide. What happens next the epic describes with surprising frankness. For 6 days and 7 nights, Enkidu knows you as a man knows a woman, though he has never known that he was a man until this moment. You teach him pleasure, but also consciousness of pleasure, desire, but also the ability to choose desire. Each time he tries to return to his animal simplicity, you draw him back with touch and voice, weaving around him the invisible threads that will forever bind him to humanity. You are patient, as only a priestess can be patient, understanding that you are midwiving a human soul into awareness. The threshold of civilization. When the 7 nights have passed, Enkidu attempts to return to the animals, but they flee from him now. The gazelles scatter at his approach. The wild asses will not let him drink beside them at the watering hole. He tries to run after them, but his body has changed in ways both subtle and profound. His legs, which once could match a gazelle's pace for hours, feel heavy and slow. His mind, which once held only the present moment, now carries memory and anticipation, desire and regret. He has eaten from the tree of knowledge, though in this story it is not a tree, but a woman, not fruit, but love, that brings the fall from innocence. Shamhat watches his distress with compassion, understanding what he cannot yet grasp, that he has not lost something but transformed into something else, something that carries both more suffering and more potential than his animal existence ever could. She speaks to him now, and for the first time, he understands human speech, as if his ears have been unplugged or a veil lifted from his mind. Her words paint pictures of the city, of Gilgamesh, the king whose strength matches his own, of bread and beer, of music and fellowship, of all the complex pleasures and pains that come with human consciousness. She takes his hand, that hand which has known only grass and fur and earth, and leads him to where shepherds have set up their camp, not far from the watering hole. The shepherds, when they see them approaching, react with a mixture of fear and wonder. They have heard rumours of the wild man, and to see him walking upright, hand in hand with a temple woman, seems like witnessing a moment from the old stories when gods walked the earth and transformed humans with their touch. The shepherds place food before them, the bread that is the staff of life in Mesopotamia. Enkidu stares at it, not knowing what to do with this strange object that smells pleasant but looks like nothing he has ever considered eating. Shamhat breaks off a piece and places it in his mouth, and his eyes widen at the taste, at the complex flavors of grain transformed by human ingenuity into sustenance. He devours 7 loaves, his body craving this new fuel that seems to awaken parts of him that have been sleeping since his creation. Then they give him beer, that other foundation of Mesopotamian civilization, and his first sip makes him cough and sputter, but Shamhat encourages him, explaining that this is the drink of men and women, the liquid that makes hard labor bearable and transforms strangers into friends. He drinks 7 cups, and with each one, he feels something loosening inside him, some tight knot of wildness, unwinding into something more expansive. He begins to laugh, a sound he has never made before, and the shepherds laugh with him, recognizing in this moment the birth of a new human being. They bring water and wash the matted hair from his body, revealing skin that, once cleaned, gleams like polished bronze. They anoint him with oil, the mark of civilized humanity, and dress him in a simple tunic. When he stands before them transformed, the shepherds gasp, for he is beautiful in the way of heroes, his natural strength now enhanced by the dignity of human consciousness. But more than his appearance has changed. His eyes now carry that unique human quality, awareness of self, knowledge of mortality, the capacity for both hope and despair. The shepherds ask him to help protect their flocks from wolves and lions, and Enkidu agrees, understanding for the first time the concept of duty, of using one's strength for others. He stands guard through the nights, and when predators come, he drives them off, not with animal ferocity, but with human strategy. The shepherds pay him with more food and beer, with companionship and stories, with all the small rituals that weave individuals into community. In just days, he has travelled the developmental distance that took humanity thousands of years to cross, from nature to culture, from instinct to choice. Shamhat remains with him through this transformation, teaching him not just the mechanics of civilized life but its deeper meanings. She tells him about the gods and their temples, about kings and their duties, about the great cosmic order that holds everything in place. She tells him especially about Gilgamesh, and as she describes the king's strength and beauty, his loneliness and his need, she sees something awakening in Enkidu's eyes: purpose, direction, the first stirrings of the love that will define the rest of his existence. Dreams of coming friendship. In Uruk, in the cedar-scented chambers of the palace, Gilgamesh tosses in his sleep, caught in dreams more vivid than waking life. He sees a star falling from heaven, landing in the streets of his city with such force that the earth shakes. When he goes to lift it, he finds it too heavy, even for his divine strength. All the people of Uruk gather around this fallen star, kissing its base as if it were a holy object, and Gilgamesh finds himself embracing it like a wife, carrying it despite its impossible weight to lay at his mother's feet. He wakes with heart pounding and seeks out Ninsun, his mother, the wise goddess who alone understands the language of dreams. She listens as he describes the vision, her divine eyes seeing patterns that mortal minds would miss. The star, she tells him, represents a mighty friend who will come to him, someone whose strength will match his own, someone he will love as a wife, and who will never forsake him. Gilgamesh feels something crack open in his chest at these words, a sensation he cannot name, but which might be the first breach in the walls of his isolation. The next night brings another dream. An axe lies in the street, and again, all Uruk gathers around it in celebration. Again, Gilgamesh embraces it with a love that surprises him, carrying it to his mother. Ninsun's interpretation remains the same. A friend approaches, a companion who will stand beside him in all trials, someone who will understand him as no one ever has. These dreams fill Gilgamesh with an anticipation he has never felt before, a hunger different from his usual appetites. a yearning for something he cannot yet name but recognizes as essential to his survival. Clash at the wedding house. The day Enkidu enters Uruk marks a turning point, not just in two lives, but in the cosmic order itself. He walks through the great gate with Shamhat at his side, and the city strikes him like a physical blow. The noise, the smells, the sheer density of human life compressed into this space within walls, overwhelms senses that developed in the infinite openness of the wilderness. People stop in their tracks to stare at him, recognizing something different about this stranger, something that sets him apart, even though he now wears clothes and walks upright like any other man. Word of his arrival spreads through the city like floodwater, reaching the palace before Enkidu has walked halfway to the market square. But Gilgamesh is occupied with another matter. A wedding is to take place that evening, and custom demands his participation in the ritual of first night. It is a duty he has performed countless times, each one deepening his isolation, each one reminding him that all his connections with others are defined by power rather than choice. In the market square, Enkidu learns from the crowd about this custom, about how the king takes every bride before her husband, and something rises in him that he has no name for, but which civilized people would call moral outrage. This is wrong, his newly awakened human consciousness tells him, though he cannot explain why. In the wilderness, the strong take what they want, but humans, he is learning, are supposed to be different. Humans have choices, and with choices come right and wrong, justice and injustice. As evening falls, the wedding procession winds through the streets, drums beating, flutes playing, the bride carried in a litter surrounded by torch-bearers. Enkidu follows the crowd to the wedding house, where Gilgamesh will soon arrive to claim his royal privilege. But when the king approaches the doorway, he finds it blocked by a figure whose presence seems to fill the entire street. Enkidu stands, with legs braced, arms crossed, his newly civilized appearance unable to fully mask the wild power that radiates from him like heat from a forge. Their eyes meet, and in that moment, both recognize something essential in the other. Here is the equal each has unknowingly sought, the missing half that might make them whole. But recognition does not mean submission. Gilgamesh orders Enkidu to stand aside. Enkidu refuses. The king reaches out to push past this obstacle, and Enkidu's hand shoots out to grip his wrist. The crowd gasps and shrinks back, expecting immediate death for anyone who would dare touch the king in anger. What follows is not a fight, but a force of nature. They grapple in the street like bulls locking horns, their strength so evenly matched that neither can gain immediate advantage. Doorposts shatter when they slam against them, walls crack from the impact of their bodies, the very earth trembles beneath their feet. The people of Uruk watch in terrified awe as their divine king meets his match for the first time in his life. This is not the controlled violence of the wrestling ground, but something primal, desperate, essential. They fight with a fury that comes from recognition, each seeing in the other the answer to an unasked question. Enkidu, fighting for a principle he has just learned, discovers that human consciousness includes the willingness to risk everything for an idea. Gilgamesh, fighting from habit and pride, discovers that being challenged as an equal is what he has craved all along. Their combat is a conversation conducted in the language of force, each testing the other's limits, each finding those limits unreachable. The turning point comes not from superiority, but from a moment of perfect balance. They stand locked together, neither able to advance, and in that stillness, something passes between them. Gilgamesh suddenly laughs, a sound no one in Uruk has ever heard from him, full and genuine and free. He releases his grip, and Enkidu, puzzled, does the same. Then Gilgamesh does something even more unprecedented. He embraces Enkidu, not as a king embraces a subject, but as one warrior embraces another, as one half of a whole embraces its completion. Enkidu, still new to human emotions, finds tears running down his face, though whether from rage or relief or something else entirely, he cannot say. The crowd watches in amazement as their tyrannical king and this wild stranger stand there in the street, holding each other as if they were the only two people in the world. The bride, forgotten in her litter, is quietly carried away to her husband, the first woman in memory to escape the king's attention. But Gilgamesh does not notice or care. He has found something infinitely more precious than any momentary pleasure. He has found a friend. The Cedar Forest Conspiracy. The friendship that blossoms between Gilgamesh and Enkidu transforms not just the two heroes but the entire city of Uruk. The young men are no longer exhausted by the king's demands for wrestling matches. For now, Gilgamesh has a true opponent who can match him throw for throw. The new brides go to their husbands untouched, for the king has discovered a connection deeper than any sexual conquest. But with this newfound happiness comes a different problem. Two heroes of such magnitude cannot simply settle into domestic tranquility. They need a quest worthy of their combined strength, an adventure that will write their names in history forever. It is Gilgamesh who proposes the journey to the Cedar Forest, that sacred grove in the far mountains where the gods themselves have walked, where the demon Humbaba stands guard over treasures beyond human imagination. The very mention of this plan causes the elders of Uruk to pale with fear. They know the stories of those who have attempted this journey before, warriors and heroes whose bones now decorate the approach to the forest, whose screams still echo in the mountain passes on windless nights. The Cedar Forest represents more than just a physical destination. It is the boundary between the human world and the divine realm, a place where mortal ambition meets immortal power. The cedars themselves are sacred to Enlil, the god of earth and wind, and Humbaba is his appointed guardian, a creature of such terrible aspect that his face is described as coiled intestines, his breath as the wind that brings death, his roar as the flood that destroys all in its path. To challenge Humbaba is to challenge the cosmic order itself, to assert human will against divine prohibition. But Gilgamesh's motivation runs deeper than mere glory-seeking. In his friendship with Enkidu, he has discovered both the joy of human connection and its terrible fragility. Every moment of happiness is shadowed by the knowledge that it must end, that death will eventually separate them. By achieving something immortal, by performing a deed that will echo through all future generations, he hopes to defeat death in the only way available to mortals, through undying fame. If he cannot live forever, at least his name will. Enkidu's reaction to the plan is complex and reveals how far he has travelled from his wild origins. The creature who once knew no fear now understands danger. The being who lived in eternal present now comprehends future consequences. He knows the cedar forest in a way Gilgamesh cannot, for he lived at the edges of wildness and understands the power that dwells in places untouched by human hands. He tries to dissuade his friend, describing Humbaba's terrible powers, the way the monster can hear a whisper from 60 leagues away, the way his 7 auras of terror can paralyze the strongest warrior. But there is something else in Enkidu's resistance, something he cannot fully articulate, even to himself. In proposing this adventure, Gilgamesh is asking him to turn against his origins completely, to use the wild strength that came from his union with nature to destroy one of nature's last sacred preserves. The cedar forest represents what Enkidu was before Shamhat's touch transformed him, a place where civilization has not reached, where the old powers still hold sway. To attack, it would be to attack his own past, to sever the last threads connecting him to his animal innocence. Yet in the end, Enkidu agrees, and his agreement comes from the same source as his resistance: love for Gilgamesh. He sees his friend's need for this quest, understands that without some great deed to channel his divine energies, Gilgamesh will turn inward and destroy himself. Better to die together in glorious battle than to watch his friend waste away from the lack of worthy challenges. This is what human friendship means. Enkidu is learning the willingness to follow another into danger, to risk everything for someone else's dream. The preparations for the journey become a city-wide effort. The metal workers of Uruk forge weapons of unprecedented size and strength, axes that weigh 3 talents each, swords that require 2 normal men just to lift. The elders perform divinations and find the omens mixed, some favourable, others dark with warning. Ninsun, Gilgamesh's divine mother, performs elaborate rituals to protect her son, adopting Enkidu formally as her own child, so that the brothers in arms become brothers in divine law. The city that once prayed for relief from Gilgamesh now prays for his safe return. The transformation in their king has transformed their relationship with him. Where once there was fear and resentment, now there is genuine affection, even pride. Their tyrant has become their hero, and in Enkidu, they see the catalyst for this change. The wild man who entered their gates to challenge their king has become the companion who might save him, and through him, save them all. On the day of departure, the entire city gathers to see them off. The young men whose strength Gilgamesh once wasted now cheer for him. The brides he once claimed now throw flowers in his path. The elders who counselled against the journey now offer their blessings, understanding that some destinies cannot be avoided, only embraced. As the two heroes pass through the great gate, walking side by side into the rising sun, the people of Uruk understand they are witnessing something that will be remembered forever, a moment when history becomes legend. Through the gate of the mountain, the landscape changes as they travel away from the irrigated plains of Mesopotamia, leaving behind the green fields and date palm groves for increasingly rugged terrain. For 3 days, they walk what would take ordinary men 6 weeks to cover, their divine and wild strength allowing them to maintain a pace that eats up the miles, like fire-consuming dry grass. Each night, they dig a well for water, perform rituals to the gods, and Gilgamesh experiences dreams that grow progressively more disturbing. In these dreams, mountains fall on him, wild bulls trample him, a being of pure light embraces him with such force that his bones crack. Each morning, Enkidu interprets these terrifying visions as positive omens, transforming nightmares into promises of victory through the alchemy of friendship and desperate hope. Whether Enkidu truly believes his optimistic interpretations or simply seeks to maintain his friend's courage remains ambiguous, one of many psychological subtleties that make this ancient epic surprisingly modern in its emotional complexity. As they approach the cedar forest, the very air begins to change. It grows thicker, heavier, laden with a resinous scent that is both intoxicating and oppressive. The normal sounds of the wilderness, the bird calls and insect buzzing that have accompanied their journey, gradually fade until they walk in a silence so complete it seems solid. This is sacred space, unmarked by human presence since the world's creation, and every step they take forward is a violation of primordial law. They reach the gate of the forest, an actual wooden barrier that seems to have grown from the earth itself rather than being constructed. It is here that Enkidu touches the gate and immediately falls paralyzed, his wild nature recognizing the power that guards this threshold. For 12 days he lies unable to move or speak, while Gilgamesh tends to him with a gentleness that would have seemed impossible in the tyrant king of earlier days. When Enkidu finally recovers, he begs Gilgamesh once more to turn back, but his friend's determination has only grown stronger during the vigil. They will enter the forest together, or they will die together at its entrance. Humbaba's domain. You stand at the edge of the cedar forest, and your human mind struggles to process what your eyes are seeing. The trees rise impossibly tall, their trunks so vast that a dozen men holding hands could not embrace them. Their canopy blocks out the sun entirely, creating a perpetual twilight, pierced occasionally by shafts of green-filtered light that seem to illuminate nothing, but instead make the shadows deeper. The cedars are not simply trees, but living pillars holding up the sky, each one older than human memory, each one sacred to gods whose names were forgotten before the first city was built. The silence here is different from ordinary quiet. It is aggressive, actively pushing against your ears, making your heartbeat sound like thunder and your breathing like a windstorm. You take a step forward, and the sound of your foot touching the forest floor seems to echo from tree to tree, multiplying and distorting until it becomes unrecognizable. Beside you, your companion moves with equal care, his face set in determination, but his eyes betraying the same awe and terror you feel. As you penetrate deeper into the forest, you become aware of a presence that is everywhere and nowhere, watching you with intelligence that is not human, not animal, but something older and more alien. This is Humbaba's domain, and everything here is extension of his will. The paths that seem clear turn back on themselves, leading you in circles. The spaces between trees that appear wide enough to pass through narrow as you approach them, forcing you to squeeze between bark that feels warm and almost flesh-like to the touch. You hear Humbaba before you see him, a sound that starts as a low rumble you feel in your bones rather than hear with your ears. It grows louder, becoming a roar that is also a wind, a scream that is also thunder. When he finally appears, your mind cannot at first make sense of what you are seeing. His face is indeed like coiled intestines, but also like the roots of trees, like clouds boiling in a storm, like everything terrible and nothing recognizable. His body is massive but indistinct, seeming to shift between tree and beast and man and pure malevolent force. The 7 auras of terror that surround him hit you like physical blows. The first aura is paralysis. Your legs become stone, refusing to obey your will. The second is confusion. You forget why you came here, forget your own name for a moment. The third is despair. You understand with absolute certainty that you will die here. The fourth is pain. Every old wound you have ever suffered flares to life. The fifth is blindness. The world becomes a spinning kaleidoscope of meaningless colour. The sixth is deafness. All sound becomes a crushing roar. The seventh is the worst. The complete certainty that you are absolutely alone, that no one has ever loved you, that your existence is meaningless. But then you feel a hand grip yours, your friend and brother, and that touch breaks through all 7 auras like sunlight through storm clouds. Together, you remember who you are and why you came. Together, you raise your weapons against the guardian of the sacred grove. The battle that follows exists outside normal time and space. You strike blows that split cedar trees in half, dodge attacks that gouge valleys in the earth. Humbaba fights with the fury of nature itself, but you fight with something he cannot understand. Human will coupled with human love, the determination of mortals who choose their fate rather than accepting it. The price of glory. The battle reaches its climax when Shamash, the sun god who favours Gilgamesh, sends the 13 winds to bind Humbaba. The demon guardian, trapped and defeated, undergoes a transformation that neither hero expects. The terrible face becomes almost human, the roar becomes a voice capable of speech, and Humbaba begins to plead for his life with an eloquence that suggests consciousness far more complex than mere monstrous rage. He offers Gilgamesh everything. He will become the king's servant. He will cut down the cedars himself and deliver them to Uruk. He will teach the secrets of the forest that no human has ever known. His words are not the crude bargaining of a trapped animal, but the sophisticated rhetoric of a being who understands psychology, who knows how to appeal to ambition and mercy simultaneously. He reminds them that he is not evil by choice, but by divine appointment, that in killing him, they will anger Enlil, the god who placed him here. For a moment, Gilgamesh wavers. The heroic code he has learned from the ancient songs suggests that mercy to a defeated enemy is the highest virtue. But Enkidu, the wild man who should understand nature's perspective better than anyone, becomes the voice of civilized cruelty. He tells Gilgamesh that Humbaba cannot be trusted, that if released, he will attack them from behind, that mercy here means death. There is something desperate in Enkidu's insistence, as if he needs Humbaba to die to prove his own complete transformation from wild to civilized. The killing of Humbaba is not described as glorious, but as something closer to murder. The guardian curses them as he dies, and his curses carry the weight of cosmic justice violated. Enkidu especially is marked for doom, Humbaba declares, and he will not live to enjoy the fruits of this victory. The heroes try to ignore the dying monster's words, but they hang in the air like the smoke from a sacrifice refused by the gods. With Humbaba dead, they turn to the cedars themselves. These trees, some of which have stood since the world's foundation, fall one by one under their axes. Each tree that crashes to the forest floor seems to scream, and the sound echoes through the mountains like the lamentations of gods. They select the tallest and most perfect cedar to make into a door for Enlil's temple in Nippur, hoping this offering might placate the god whose sacred grove they have violated. But even as they work, they know that some violations cannot be forgiven. Some boundaries once crossed cannot be restored. The journey back to Uruk is triumphant on the surface. They float the cedar logs down the Euphrates like a merchant fleet, carrying treasure beyond calculation. People line the banks to see the heroes who dared what no one had dared before, who challenged divine prohibition and survived. But there is something different about them now, something shadowed in their eyes. They have learned what all heroes eventually learn, that victory and violation are often the same thing, that the price of glory is always higher than anticipated, that some achievements carry within them the seeds of their own punishment. Ishtar scorned. Back in Uruk, washed clean of the forest's blood, and dressed in royal robes, Gilgamesh stands on the walls he built, surveying his domain. The cedar logs are being crafted into magnificent doors and beams that will make Uruk's temples the wonder of the world. The people sing songs about their king and his companion, songs that will be sung for thousands of years. This should be the apex of his life, the moment when all his divine strength and royal power combine with unprecedented achievement. And it is precisely this moment that Ishtar chooses to make her approach. The goddess of love and war manifests not in her terrible aspect, but in her most seductive form. She is beauty incarnate, desire personified, every man's dream and every woman's aspiration made divine flesh. When she speaks to Gilgamesh, her voice carries the promise of pleasures beyond human imagination. She offers to make him her consort, to share with him the secrets of divine love, to grant him access to realms no mortal has ever entered. The bulls that pull his chariot will be made of lapis, lazuli, and gold. Kings and princes will kiss his feet, the mountains and rivers will bear tribute to him. But Gilgamesh, in a speech that must rank among the most audacious in all literature, refuses her completely and insultingly. More than that, he recites a catalogue of her previous lovers and their fates, a litany of destruction that strips away her divine glamour to reveal the destroyer beneath. There was Tammuz, the lover of her youth, whom she condemned to die and be mourned forever. There was the colourful Orlalu bird whose wing she broke, who now sits in the forest crying, "My wing." There was the lion, perfect in strength, for whom she dug 7 and 7 pits. There was the stallion, glorious in battle, whom she destined for the whip and spur and thong. The list continues with cruel precision. The shepherd who baked bread for her and daily slaughtered kids for her pleasure, she turned into a wolf, so that his own shepherd boys drove him away, and his dogs bit his haunches. Her father's gardener, Ishulanu, who brought her baskets of dates, who made her table sparkle, she turned into a mole when he refused her advances. Each example builds the case that Ishtar's love is indistinguishable from destruction, that to accept her offer is to accept annihilation. Gilgamesh's rejection goes beyond mere refusal to become a philosophical statement about divine human relationships. He sees through the goddess's offer to its essential truth, that gods use humans for their pleasure and discard them when they grow boring. His friendship with Enkidu has taught him that real love exists between equals, involves sacrifice and commitment, endures through time rather than consuming in an instant. What Ishtar offers is not love but appetite, not connection but consumption. The bull of heaven. Ishtar's rage at this rejection transcends normal divine anger. She ascends to heaven, to Anu her father, the king of all gods, and demands justice through tears that are also threats. She wants the bull of heaven, that celestial weapon of divine punishment, to destroy Gilgamesh and his city. When Anu hesitates, pointing out that releasing the bull will cause 7 years of famine, Ishtar reveals she is already prepared for this, storing enough grain to feed the people and fodder for the animals. Her revenge has been planned with the cold calculation of a general preparing for war. The bull of heaven descends to earth like a living catastrophe. With its first snort, it opens a pit that swallows 100 young men of Uruk. With its second snort, It opens another pit that swallows 200. With its third snort, it opens a pit at the Euphrates River, and Enkidu falls in up to his waist. The city that celebrated its hero's return from the cedar forest now faces annihilation because of their success. The cosmic balance has been disturbed, and the price is being paid not just by the heroes but by everyone around them. But Enkidu, drawing on both his wild strength and his newfound human cunning, leaps from the pit and seizes the bull by its horns. Here is a reversal of his original state, where once he freed animals from hunters, now he hunts the greatest animal of all. He calls to Gilgamesh, with strategy born from their partnership. One will distract while the other strikes. They fight the bull of heaven not as individuals but as a unit, their friendship manifesting as coordinated violence. The battle is brief but decisive. While Enkidu holds the bull's massive head, dodging its thrashing horns and flying spittle thick as rain, Gilgamesh drives his sword into the exact spot behind the horns, where divine life can be ended. The bull of heaven falls with a crash that shakes the foundations of the city, and for a moment there is silence as profound as that in the cedar forest before Humbaba appeared. Then the people of Uruk burst into celebration. Not fully understanding that their heroes have just committed another cosmic crime, have added deicide to their growing list of violations. The heroes butcher the bull with ritual precision, offering its heart to Shamash, their patron, hoping divine support might protect them from divine punishment. But Enkidu, in a moment of fatal hubris, commits an act that seals his doom. When Ishtar appears on the walls of Uruk to curse them, he tears off the bull's haunch, its massive thigh, and throws it in her face with words that cannot be taken back. If I could reach you, I would do the same to you. It is the wild man's final wild act, and it will cost him everything. Dreams of the netherworld. That night, while Uruk celebrates, and maidens sing lamentations over the bull of heaven's severed member, Enkidu sleeps and dreams, a dream that is more than dream. He sees the gods in council, and their debate is brief and terrible. Anu speaks. They have killed the bull of heaven, and they have killed Humbaba, who guarded the cedar forest. One of them must die. Enlil responds, let Enkidu die, but let not Gilgamesh die. Shamash attempts to intervene, pointing out that the heroes acted with his encouragement, but the other gods dismiss his protests. Divine justice does not recognize mortal concepts of fairness. In his dream, Enkidu sees his own future, with the clarity that comes only in the space between sleeping and waking. He sees himself growing weak, his wild strength draining away like water into sand. He sees Gilgamesh weeping over him, refusing to accept what cannot be changed. Most terribly, he sees what awaits him after death. The house of dust, where the dead dwell in darkness, where they eat clay and drink muddy water, where kings and princes serve as slaves, where all human achievement becomes meaningless, where even the greatest heroes become shadows of shadows. The dream continues, with a vision so detailed it seems less like prophecy than memory. He sees himself being transformed into a bird-like creature by a figure with a vampire's face, with lion's claws and eagle's talons. This being drags him down to the netherworld, where he witnesses the fate of all mortals, from the highest rulers to the lowest servants. There sits Etana, the king who rode an eagle to heaven. There is Samkan, the cattle god. There is Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld. And before her squats Belit Seri, the scribe of the dead, reading from the tablet that records every human fate. When Enkidu wakes and tells his dream to Gilgamesh, both understand that the verdict has been pronounced and cannot be appealed. The wild man who was created to be Gilgamesh's equal will be destroyed for that equality. The friendship that saved them both will destroy one of them. The love that made them more than mortal has attracted the jealousy of immortals, who cannot bear to see humans transcend their limitations, even temporarily. 12 days of ending. The sickness comes quickly, as if Enkidu's body, having heard its fate, begins immediately to comply. The wild strength that could wrestle bulls drains away hour by hour, leaving him weak as a child. His skin, once bronzed by sun and weather, becomes pale and clammy. His eyes, which could spot a gazelle at 1,000 paces, grow dim and unfocused. But his mind remains clear, and this clarity is its own torture, forcing him to experience every moment of his dissolution with full awareness. On the first day, he curses the hunter who first saw him in the wilderness, who set in motion the chain of events that brought him to this moment. On the second day, he curses Shamhat, the temple woman who seduced him from his animal innocence into human consciousness and thus into mortality. His curses are elaborate and cruel, wishing upon her a life of degradation and abuse. But Shamash, the sun god, speaks to him from heaven, reminding him of all that Shamhat gave him: friendship with Gilgamesh, the honours of the palace, the experience of being human with all its pain and glory. Ashamed, Enkidu reverses his curse into a blessing, wishing Shamhat all good things, the love of governors and princes. On the third day, his fever rises, and he begins to speak to people who are not there, holding conversations with his animal companions from the wilderness. On the fourth day, he asks Gilgamesh to describe again and again their adventures together, as if by retelling them, they might become permanent, he might survive his death. On the fifth day, he stops eating, his body rejecting even the simplest food. On the sixth day, he begins to forget words, language itself deserting him as he moves back toward his pre-verbal state. On the seventh day, there is a brief improvement that fills Gilgamesh with desperate hope. Enkidu sits up, speaks clearly, even manages to laugh at some memory of their time together. But this is the cruel gift sometimes given to the dying, a final moment of clarity before the end. On the eighth day, the decline resumes with doubled force. On the ninth day, Enkidu can no longer recognize Gilgamesh, looking at his friend with eyes that see only a stranger. On the 10th day, Enkidu speaks his last coherent words, not to Gilgamesh but to the door he carved from the cedar of the sacred forest. He addresses it as if it were alive, lamenting that if he had known the trouble it would cause, he would have chopped it up with an axe. This bizarre focus on the door, rather than on his friend, reveals the confusion of a mind dissolving, but also perhaps a deeper truth, that our violations of the natural order, symbolized by that door made from sacred wood, carry consequences we cannot foresee. On the 11th day, Enkidu falls into a sleep from which he cannot be roused. Gilgamesh sits beside him, holding his hand, feeling the pulse that grows weaker with each hour. On the 12th day, at the moment when dawn breaks over Uruk's walls, Enkidu dies. He does not die as a hero in battle, with glory and honour, but as all humans die, slowly, painfully, inevitably. The wild man who was created from clay returns to clay, leaving Gilgamesh more alone than he has ever been. The Lamentation. For 7 days and 7 nights, Gilgamesh refuses to accept Enkidu's death. He will not let the body be taken for burial, insisting that his friend is only sleeping deeply, that he will wake if given time. He sits beside the corpse, talking to it, telling it stories of future adventures they will share, plans for greater victories than any they have achieved. The palace servants watch in horror as their divine king denies reality itself, as a maggot drops from Enkidu's nose, and Gilgamesh brushes it away as if it were a speck of dust. When he finally accepts that Enkidu is truly dead, Gilgamesh's grief explodes with the force of his divine nature. His lamentation can be heard throughout Uruk and beyond, a sound that is part roar, part weeping, part cosmic complaint against the fundamental injustice of existence. He tears his clothes and hair, he puts on the skin of a lion, as if trying to become the wild creature Enkidu once was. He becomes, in his grief, the inverse of what Enkidu became through Shamhat's civilizing touch, a king turned savage by loss. The funeral he orchestrates for Enkidu surpasses anything Uruk has ever seen. He commissions a statue of his friend, made from precious metals and gems, as if permanence in gold might compensate for impermanence in flesh. He sacrifices his finest possessions, filling Enkidu's grave with treasures that would bankrupt kingdoms. He commands every citizen of Uruk to mourn, and they do, both from obedience and from genuine sorrow for the wild man who helped transform their tyrant into a hero. But even as the funeral rites are performed with perfect ceremony, even as the offerings pile up and the lamentations echo through the streets, Gilgamesh knows that none of this matters. The house of dust that Enkidu saw in his dream awaits regardless of funeral splendor. Death is not impressed by gold or gems, by fame or achievement. It comes for wild men and kings alike, for the two-thirds divine and the fully mortal, and nothing in all of human culture can prevent its coming. The change in Gilgamesh after Enkidu's burial is profound and terrible. The hero who sought fame now sees its emptiness. The king who built walls to last forever now understands that forever is a word without meaning in human context. Most terribly, he realizes that he too will die, that his divine blood grants him strength but not immortality, that he will follow Enkidu into the house of dust, where all achievements become meaningless. This knowledge drives him from Uruk, from civilization itself, out into the wilderness, on a quest that is really a flight, the search for Utnapishtim, the one human who escaped death, the survivor of the great flood, who lives forever at the world's edge. Beyond the waters of death. You are Gilgamesh, though you barely recognize yourself anymore. Your hair has grown wild and matted, your royal robes replaced by the skin of lions you have killed in the wilderness. You have wandered beyond the boundaries of the known world, past the mountains where the sun rises, through valleys no human foot has touched, driven by a fear so profound it has replaced every other emotion. The fear of death, which came to you with Enkidu's last breath, has become the only truth you acknowledge. You stand now at the shore of the waters of death, that impossible sea that separates the world of mortals from the dwelling place of Utnapishtim, the one human who survived the great flood and was granted immortality by the gods. The water before you is not like any water you have known. It does not reflect the sky but seems to swallow light, creating a surface that is both liquid and void. To touch it means instant death, yet you must cross it to reach the far shore where answers wait. The ferryman Urshanabi watches you with eyes that have seen too many desperate seekers. His boat is strange, equipped with stone figures that somehow allow passage across the lethal waters. But in your divine rage, your grief-driven madness, you have already destroyed these stone things, smashing them in your fury at being challenged, at being asked to prove your worth. Now Urshanabi tells you that you yourself must find a way across, that your own actions have made your quest nearly impossible. Together, you cut down trees, massive pines that groan as they fall. You shape them into punting poles, 120 of them, each one to be used once, and then discarded before the waters of death can creep up the wood to reach your hands. The physical labour feels good, reminds you of building Uruk's walls, of constructing something rather than destroying. But this construction is in service of an impossible goal, to become something other than human, to escape the fate that claims all who are born. As you push off from the shore, using the first pole to propel the boat forward, you feel the waters of death trying to climb toward you, a cold that is more than cold, an emptiness that wants to fill itself with your life. You release the pole just in time, grab another, push again. The repetition becomes hypnotic. Push, release, grab, push, release, grab. Each pole you abandon dissolves in the water behind you, erased from existence as if it never was. Halfway across, you begin to understand something. This journey, this impossible crossing, is itself a kind of death. The Gilgamesh who entered this boat is not the one who will emerge on the far shore. Each pole you release carries with it some piece of your former self, your pride, your rage, your desperate denial of mortality. By the time you reach the other side, using the last of your poles, you are emptied out, prepared perhaps for the wisdom that Utnapishtim might share, or perhaps simply exhausted beyond the capacity for further struggle. The survivor's tale. Utnapishtim, the faraway, sits before you, and nothing about him suggests divinity or immortality. He appears to be simply an old man, weathered but not majestic, tired but not transcendent. When you demand to know how he escaped death, how a mortal became immortal, his answer comes not as a secret formula, but as a story, long and detailed, and heavy with the weight of survival that is its own burden. "I will reveal to you, Gilgamesh," he says, "a secret of the gods. In the city of Shurapak, which you know, the gods decided to send a flood to destroy humanity. Why they made this decision remains unclear even to me. Perhaps we had become too numerous, too noisy, or perhaps it was simply divine caprice. But Ea, the wise god, warned me in a dream, speaking not to me directly, but to the walls of my reed house, knowing that walls have no obligation to keep divine secrets." Utnapishtim tells how he built an enormous boat according to Ea's precise specifications, a perfect cube with 6 decks, each divided into 9 compartments. The dimensions were important, he emphasizes, as if the mathematical precision might explain his survival when so many others perished. He waterproofed it with bitumen, the same material you used in Uruk's walls, that black tar that binds brick to brick, here binding wood to create an arc against annihilation. He loaded the boat with all the seed of life, his family, his craftsmen, the animals of the field, both wild and tame, gold and silver, everything needed to restart civilization after its erasure. The other citizens of Shurapak laughed at this landlocked boat, this enormous structure so far from any water that could float it. They laughed until the day the rain began. Not ordinary rain, but a cosmic deluge, water falling from above and bursting from below, the boundaries between the waters above the firmament and the waters below the earth completely dissolved. For 6 days and 7 nights, Utnapishtim continues, his voice growing quieter as he remembers. The flood swept over the land. The gods themselves were terrified by what they had unleashed. They cowered like dogs, crouched against the walls of heaven. Ishtar wept for the humans she had helped create, now drowning in countless numbers. Even the gods had not anticipated such total devastation, such complete erasure of the world they had made. When the waters finally receded, Utnapishtim sent out birds to find land. First a dove that returned, then a swallow that returned, finally a raven that did not return, signalling that dry ground had been found. He opened the boat and released all life back into the empty world, then made sacrifices to the gods, who gathered around the sweet smoke like flies, so starved were they for worship, after the flood destroyed all their temples and worshippers. The gods quarrelled over his survival. Enlil was furious that any human had escaped, but Ea argued that Utnapishtim had shown wisdom and righteousness. In the end, as a compromise, or perhaps simply to end the divine bickering, Enlil granted Utnapishtim and his wife immortality, but placed them here, at the world's edge, far from other humans, to live forever in isolation. This is immortality, Utnapishtim concludes, not a reward but a different kind of burden. To watch ages pass, to see everyone you might come to care about age and die, to exist outside the human story while remaining human in memory and desire. But you, Gilgamesh, barely hear this warning hidden in his tale. You fix on the fact of his immortality, not its cost. You demand to know how you too can escape death. And Utnapishtim, seeing your desperation, proposes a test. If you cannot master sleep, the little death that comes each night, how can you hope to master death itself? Stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights, and perhaps you will prove yourself worthy of immortality. The plant of heartbeat. The test is failed before it truly begins. The moment you sit down, the exhaustion of your journey, the weight of your grief, the impossibility of your quest, all crash over you like a wave, and you fall into the deepest sleep of your life. For 6 days and 7 nights you sleep, while Utnapishtim's wife bakes bread each day and places it beside you, creating a physical record of time passing that you cannot deny. When Utnapishtim finally wakes you, you try to claim you merely dozed for a moment, but the bread tells the truth. The first loaf is hard as stone, the second mouldy, the third soggy, and so on to the 7th, still warm from the oven. Faced with this undeniable evidence of your failure, you despair completely. If you cannot even stay awake, how can you hope to avoid death? You who were 2/3 divine, who killed Humbaba and the Bull of Heaven, who built walls that will last millennia, cannot master even this simple test. The futility of your quest becomes clear, and for the first time since Enkidu's death, you weep not from grief, but from acceptance of your own limitations. Utnapishtim's wife takes pity on you, this broken king who has travelled so far for nothing. She persuades her husband to give you something for your journey, some consolation for your impossible quest. Utnapishtim then reveals a secret he perhaps should not share. At the bottom of the cosmic ocean grows a plant called the old man becomes a young man. It will not grant immortality, but it will restore youth, turning back time's effects on the body, if not on fate itself. You dive into the cosmic waters, tying stones to your feet to sink to the impossible depths where this plant grows. The pressure crushes your chest, your lungs scream for air, but your divine strength allows you to reach the ocean floor, where the plant grows among coral that has never known sunlight. It is thorny, cutting your hands as you grasp it, your blood clouding the water, but you hold tight and allow the stones to fall away, shooting up toward the surface with your prize. The plant in your hands pulses with its own life, warm and vital. You could eat it now, restore your youth immediately, but you decide to wait. You will bring it back to Uruk, share it with the elders, create a city where age is conquered, if not death. This is your new vision, not personal immortality, but communal renewal, using this gift to benefit the people you once oppressed. The transformation in your thinking, from individual to collective, from taking to giving, marks how profoundly your journey has changed you. But the world has one more lesson to teach. As you bathe in a cool pool on your journey home, washing away the salt and weariness of your travels, a serpent smells the sweet fragrance of the plant you have left on the shore. It glides forward silently, takes the plant in its mouth, and disappears into the underbrush. As it departs, it sheds its skin, emerging renewed and young, demonstrating the plant's power while stealing it forever from human reach. You chase after it, but serpents leave no tracks, and the plant is gone, leaving you with nothing but the memory of what might have been. The serpent's theft. The serpent that stole your plant of renewal moves through the grass without guilt or awareness of what it has done. To the snake, the plant was simply something sweet-smelling to consume, its theft no more meaningful than eating any other meal. Yet, in that thoughtless act, the serpent has enacted a truth older than cities, older than civilization itself, that renewal and immortality belong to nature, not to human ambition. You sit by the pool and laugh, a sound that starts as bitterness but transforms into something else, something almost like relief. The plant is gone, and with it your last hope of cheating death. But in losing it, you have gained something else. The understanding that the quest itself was always doomed, that mortality is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be accepted. The serpent, in stealing your plant, has freed you from the burden of impossible hope. As you watch the shed skin the serpent left behind, gossamer thin and perfect in every scale's detail, you understand the difference between renewal and immortality. The snake will shed its skin again and again, each time emerging fresh, but the snake itself will eventually die. Renewal is cyclical, temporary, a delay rather than an escape. Only in accepting endings can there be new beginnings, and perhaps this is what the serpent's unwitting teacher has shown you. Return to the mighty walls. The journey back to Uruk is different from any travelling you have done before. You move without urgency, without destination fever, taking time to observe the world you had rushed through unseeing on your desperate quest. The same landscapes that had seemed like obstacles now reveal themselves as wonders. A flight of birds becomes a poem written in the air. A distant mountain transforms with each hour's changing light. The world you had wanted to escape now seems unbearably beautiful in its transience. When Uruk's walls finally appear on the horizon, you feel something loosen in your chest, a knot you did not know was there. These walls you built, this city you ruled and abandoned and now returned to, stands as it always has, unchanged by your absence. The citizens who see you approaching do not recognize their king in this wild-haired wanderer until you speak, and they hear the voice that once commanded and now merely requests entry to the city that is still yours. You bring Urshanabi the ferryman with you, the last witness to your quest, and you lead him up onto the walls. "Look," you tell him, and your voice carries pride without arrogance, love without possession. "See how the foundation is made of baked brick, how the walls shine in the sunday. Measure the city, walk its ramparts, examine its construction. Is this not magnificent? 1 square mile of city, 1 square mile of gardens, 1 square mile of clay pits, and the precinct of Ishtar's temple. 3 square miles, and the precinct comprise Uruk." These are the same words spoken in the epic's prologue, the circle closing, the end becoming the beginning. But now these words mean something different. Before, they were boasts of achievement. Now, they are acknowledgements of what humans can create within the bounds of mortality. The walls will outlast you, but they too will eventually fall. The city will continue beyond your reign, but it too will one day be ruins. And somehow, knowing this makes them more precious, not less. The 12th tablet. There exists a strange addition to the epic, a 12th tablet that does not quite fit with the 11 that precede it. In this tablet, Enkidu is somehow alive again, or perhaps this is a different story, from before his death, inserted here by some ancient scribe who could not bear to let the epic end with acceptance, who needed one more glimpse of the friends together, one more chance to explore what lies beyond death. In this version, Gilgamesh has dropped his pukku and mikku, mysterious objects perhaps representing drum and drumstick or ball and mallet, through a hole into the netherworld. Enkidu volunteers to retrieve them, despite Gilgamesh's warnings about the strict rules that govern the underworld. "Do not wear clean clothes," Gilgamesh tells him. "Do not anoint yourself with oil. Do not carry weapons. Do not make noise. Do not kiss those you loved or strike those you hated. Every normal human behavior must be suppressed in the land of the dead." But Enkidu, in this telling, breaks every rule. He enters the netherworld as if still alive, acting with all the passion and vitality that marked his earthly existence. As a result, he is trapped there, seized by the netherworld's powers and prevented from returning. Gilgamesh weeps and petitions the gods, eventually convincing them to allow Enkidu's spirit to rise briefly from a crack in the earth, like smoke from a sacrifice. The conversation between Gilgamesh and Enkidu's shade is heartbreaking in its mundane specificity. Gilgamesh asks about the fate of different types of people in the afterlife. Those who died in battle, those who had many sons, those who had no one to make offerings for them. Enkidu's answers paint a picture of an afterlife where earthly status matters, but does not determine everything, where the warrior who died gloriously still suffers, where having 7 sons provides comfort but not joy. "Did you see the one who died a sudden death?" Gilgamesh asks. "I saw him," Enkidu replies. "He lies on the night couch and drinks pure water." This strange detail, suggesting that sudden death might be preferable to lingering illness, reflects a Mesopotamian view of death, unsoftened by promises of paradise. The netherworld is neither reward nor punishment, but simply continuation in diminished form, existence drained of vitality, but not entirely erased. The tablet ends abruptly, without resolution or comfort, and scholars debate whether it was originally part of the epic or added later by scribes who felt the story needed this final glimpse of what awaits after death. Either way, it serves as a sobering coda, reminding us that the epic's acceptance of mortality does not include illusions about what death actually means. There is no happy afterlife waiting, no reunion with loved ones in paradise. There is only the house of dust, and the best one can hope for is to be remembered by the living, to have someone pour offerings and speak one's name. Echoes in Abraham's land. The influence of the Epic of Gilgamesh extends far beyond the cuneiform tablets on which it was written, rippling through cultures and centuries in ways its authors could never have imagined. Most striking are the parallels with biblical narratives, connections that become undeniable once recognized. The flood story that George Smith discovered on Tablet 11 predates the biblical account by more than a millennium, yet contains details so specific that coincidence seems impossible. Consider the precise parallels: a divine decision to destroy humanity with a flood, One righteous man warned in advance, an ark built to specific dimensions, animals brought aboard in pairs, the release of birds to find dry land, a sacrifice offered after the waters recede, and a divine promise never to destroy the world by flood again. Even small details align. The ark coming to rest on a mountain, the hero getting drunk after his survival, the number 7 appearing repeatedly in both narratives. These similarities suggest not plagiarism, but a shared cultural memory, a traumatic event perhaps based on the actual flooding that periodically devastated Mesopotamian cities, transformed through telling and retelling into cosmic significance. But the influence goes deeper than plot parallels. The Eden narrative in Genesis contains elements that seem drawn from Gilgamesh's world, a serpent that steals immortality from humans, a plant or tree that could grant eternal life. The concept of knowledge bringing suffering rather than joy. The biblical serpent, like the one that steals Gilgamesh's plant, becomes the agent that ensures human mortality. The tree of life, guarded by cherubim with flaming swords after Adam and Eve's expulsion, echoes the plant of renewal that remains forever beyond human reach. Even the geography connects these stories. Abraham, patriarch of the Hebrew people, comes from Ur, a city just downstream from Uruk on the Euphrates. He would have grown up with the Epic of Gilgamesh as part of his cultural inheritance, its themes and stories part of the narrative environment that shaped his understanding of the world. When his descendants, carried into Babylonian exile centuries later, encountered the epic again in the libraries of their captors, they would have recognized in it both foreign mythology and familiar truth. The wisdom literature of the Bible also shows Gilgamesh's influence. Ecclesiastes, with its refrain of vanity of vanities, all is vanity, its meditation on the meaninglessness of human achievement in the face of death, reads like a philosophical commentary on Gilgamesh's failed quest for immortality. There is nothing better for mortals than to eat and drink and find enjoyment in their toil, says the preacher. Echoing the advice Siduri, the tavern keeper, gives Gilgamesh in the old Babylonian version. Fill your belly, day and night make merry, let your garments be sparkling fresh, let your head be washed, bathe in water, pay heed to the little one that holds your hand, let a spouse delight in your embrace, for this too is the lot of mortals. The transformation of these themes across cultures reveals how universal stories become particular to each people who tell them. The Mesopotamian acceptance of mortality becomes, in Hebrew hands, a trust in divine justice that transcends death. The arbitrary gods of Gilgamesh become the singular god of Abraham, demanding but ultimately just. The hero's individual quest becomes a people's collective journey. Yet underneath these transformations, the fundamental questions remain. Why must we die? How should we live knowing we will die? What meaning can human life have if it must end? The Library of Ashurbanipal. In the ruins of Nineveh, in what is now northern Iraq, archaeologists continue to unearth tablets from the Library of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria who ruled from 668 to 627 BCE. This library, the first systematic attempt to collect all the world's knowledge in one place, represents a kind of immortality that Gilgamesh never imagined. The preservation of thought across millennia, the survival of stories beyond the death of civilizations. Ashurbanipal was a warrior king who could read and write, unusual for his time, when even royalty often relied on scribes. He sent agents throughout Mesopotamia with orders to copy every text they could find, to purchase or confiscate private collections, to interview elderly priests who might remember oral traditions not yet written down. The library he assembled contained over 30,000 tablets, covering everything from medical treatments to mathematical problems, from religious rituals to epic poetry. The Epic of Gilgamesh, already ancient in his time, was one of his prize acquisitions. Picture the scribal rooms where the copying took place, lit by oil lamps and high windows, filled with the soft sound of styluses pressing into clay. The scribes sit cross-legged, tablets on their laps, working from dawn to dusk to preserve words first written 1,000 years before. Some are masters who can read the ancient Sumerian as easily as contemporary Akkadian. Others are students, learning their craft by copying the same passages again and again until every wedge is perfect. The concentration required is intense. A single misplaced stroke can change the meaning of a word, turn a god into a demon, transform victory into defeat. The irony is profound. Ashurbanipal's military campaigns were brutal, even by ancient standards. His victory monuments, boasting of enemies flayed alive, of cities reduced to rubble, of entire peoples erased. Yet this same king devoted enormous resources to preserving the cultural achievements of civilizations his armies were simultaneously destroying. Perhaps he understood what Gilgamesh learned, that military victory is temporary, that even the greatest empires fall, but that words pressed into clay and fired in kilns might outlast the rising and falling of 100 kingdoms. Lost in translation. To translate the Epic of Gilgamesh is to enter a labyrinth where every path leads to compromise. The Akkadian language, dead for 2 millennia, survives only in these clay impressions, its grammar reconstructed by scholars like archaeologists assembling pottery from shards. Each translator must decide not just what the words mean, but what kind of story they are telling. Is this mythology or history, sacred text or secular literature? Should it sound ancient and formal or immediate and accessible? Consider the famous opening line. The Akkadian reads, Shah Nagba Imuru, which literally means, who saw the deep? But what is the deep? The word Nagba can mean the underground waters, the cosmic abyss, secret knowledge, or profound experience. Andrew George translates it as, he who saw the deep, emphasizing cosmic significance. Stephen Mitchell renders it as, he who saw into the depths, focusing on psychological insight. Maureen Kovacs chooses, he who saw everything, emphasizing comprehensive knowledge. Each choice creates a different Gilgamesh, a different epic, a different meaning. The challenge extends beyond individual words to entire concepts that have no modern equivalent. The Mesopotamian cosmos, with its waters above and below, its netherworld that is neither hell nor heaven, its gods who are neither omnipotent nor benevolent, requires explanation that the original audience would not have needed. The translator must decide whether to footnote extensively, breaking the narrative flow, or to incorporate explanations into the text, adding words that were never there. Then there are the gaps, the places where tablets are broken, where crucial passages are missing. Some translators mark these lacunae honestly with brackets and ellipses. Others attempt reconstruction based on parallel passages or narrative logic. Still others simply skip over the gaps, creating smooth narratives that hide their own incompleteness. Each approach involves ethical decisions about the relationship between ancient text and modern reader, between preservation and accessibility. Even the tone presents problems. The epic combines elevated poetry with crude humour, philosophical depth with cartoonish violence, psychological realism with mythological impossibility. Enkidu's seduction by Shamhat is described with frank sexuality that some translators soften and others emphasize. The gods are portrayed with a mixture of reverence and irreverence that fits no modern religious sensibility. The translator must navigate between prudishness and sensationalism, between respect and accuracy. Modern translators also grapple with contemporary relevance. In an age concerned with environmental destruction, Gilgamesh's assault on the cedar forest reads differently than it did even 50 years ago. In the wake of colonial devastation, his civilizing of Enkidu takes on troubling implications. Some translators emphasize these contemporary resonances. Others try to present the text without modern judgment. But true neutrality is impossible when every word choice carries cultural weight. The continuing search. In March of 2003, as coalition forces prepared to invade Iraq, a team of German archaeologists announced they believed they had found the tomb of Gilgamesh. Using magnetometry to detect anomalies beneath the dried bed of the Euphrates, which had shifted course since ancient times, they identified structures consistent with the epic's description of Gilgamesh's burial. The war prevented further excavation, and the site remains unexamined, another layer of loss in a region that has seen so much destruction. The search for Gilgamesh never really stopped, merely transformed with each generation's obsessions. Victorian scholars sought him as proof that the Bible's historical claims could be verified through archaeology. 20th-century psychologists found in him the archetype of the hero's journey, the universal pattern of human development. Modern archaeologists use satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar, searching for physical evidence of a historical king beneath the layers of myth. But perhaps the most poignant search is conducted by the marsh Arabs of southern Iraq, whose traditional way of life preserved elements of ancient Mesopotamian culture into the 21st century. Their reed houses, built exactly as described in the Epic, floated on constructed islands in the marshes between the Tigris and Euphrates. Their water buffalo could have been Enkidu's companions. Their stories, told in Arabic but echoing ancient themes, kept alive an oral tradition that predates Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. The draining of the marshes by Saddam Hussein in the 1990s, an ecological disaster aimed at destroying the marsh Arabs' refuge, represents another chapter in the epic's long dialogue with destruction. The landscape where Enkidu ran with the wild herds became salt-crusted wasteland. The people who might have been the epic's last living link scattered into refugee camps and urban slums. Yet even this devastation contained seeds of renewal. After Hussein's fall, water began returning to the marshes, and with it, some of the people and their stories. In the museums of memory. You stand now in the Sulaymaniyah Museum in Iraqi Kurdistan, where in 2011 a smuggled tablet containing 20 new lines of the Epic of Gilgamesh was discovered. The tablet, purchased from a smuggler to prevent its disappearance into the black market, fills a crucial gap in Tablet 5, adding details to the cedar forest episode that change our understanding of the story. In these new lines, the forest is described as a paradise filled with the songs of birds and the chattering of monkeys, making its destruction even more tragic. The museum guard watches you with the wariness that comes from protecting treasures in a region where heritage has so often become casualty. Behind bulletproof glass, the tablet rests in climate-controlled stillness, its surface covered with minute cuneiform impressions that most visitors cannot read. Yet people stand before it in silence, as if proximity to these ancient words might convey meaning beyond language, as if the clay itself remembers the hands that shaped it 3,000 years ago. You think about all the tablets still buried in Iraqi soil, waiting for discovery or destruction, whichever comes first. Every construction project, every bomb, every flood might reveal or destroy another piece of the epic. The British Museum holds hundreds of fragments still unread, lacking the funding for translation. Private collections hide tablets purchased before international law made such trade illegal. Somewhere, perhaps, lies the tablet that would fill the remaining gaps, that would tell us exactly what Gilgamesh learned in the cedar forest, what wisdom he brought back from his journey. In this quiet moment in the museum, you understand that you too are part of the epic's continuation. Every reader becomes a tablet, carrying the story forward into an uncertain future. Your neurons firing as you process these words create new patterns, new connections between ancient Uruk and your present moment. The epic's immortality lies not in divine decree, but in this endless chain of transmission, each generation discovering in Gilgamesh's quest their own questions about meaning and mortality. The universal story. Why does this oldest of stories still speak to us? Perhaps because it addresses the one experience that unites every human across culture and time, the knowledge of our own mortality, and the question of how to live with that knowledge. Gilgamesh's journey from tyrant to hero, to broken seeker, to accepting king, mirrors the path each of us must walk, though hopefully with less dramatic extremes. His friendship with Enkidu reminds us that love makes life meaningful, even as it makes loss unbearable. His failures teach what his successes never could. The epic offers no easy consolation. Unlike later hero tales, Gilgamesh does not defeat death, does not achieve immortality, does not even die gloriously in battle. He simply returns home with empty hands and hard-won wisdom. The walls of Uruk, which seemed like prison bars at the epic's beginning, become at its end a symbol of what humans can achieve within their limitations. They will not last forever, but they will last longer than their builder, and perhaps that is enough. Modern readers find in the epic a refreshing honesty about power, friendship, and mortality. In an age of superhero narratives where death is reversible and victory is assured, Gilgamesh's failures feel more real than his successes. His grief for Enkidu, raw and unrestrained, gives permission for our own grief. His quest for immortality, futile but understandable, validates our own desire to deny death's reality. His final acceptance offers not triumph but a quieter victory, the choice to build and love and live, despite knowing that everything ends. The epic also speaks to our environmental moment. The destruction of the cedar forest, presented not as pure heroism, but as violation that brings divine punishment, resonates with contemporary concerns about humanity's relationship with nature. Enkidu's transformation from wild to civilized, which brings both consciousness and death, questions whether human progress is worth its costs. The Bull of Heaven, killed for glory but triggering famine, warns that our victories over nature might be our own undoing. Modern Gilgamesh. The epic continues to generate new versions, each era finding in it reflections of contemporary concerns. Modern poets reimagine Gilgamesh and Enkidu's relationship through various lenses of love and identity. Science fiction writers transport the quest to distant planets or virtual realities. Graphic novelists visualize the unvisualizable, giving form to divine terrors and netherworld shadows. Each adaptation changes the story while keeping its essential core, the search for meaning in the face of mortality. In the theatre, adaptations range from faithful recreations, using reconstructed Akkadian pronunciation, to radical reimaginings, where Gilgamesh is a corporate CEO and the cedar forest is a protected rainforest. Opera composers find in the epic's emotional extremes perfect material for arias of grief and duets of friendship. Video game designers create interactive versions where players can attempt what Gilgamesh could not, defeating death through skill and persistence, though the best games subvert this expectation, teaching through failure what the epic teaches through narrative. Academic study of the epic has evolved from pure philology to interdisciplinary investigation. Digital humanities projects use AI to predict missing passages based on pattern analysis of existing text. Climate scientists study the epic's flood narrative for evidence of actual meteorological events. Psychologists analyze Gilgamesh's grief through contemporary understanding of trauma and recovery. Each discipline finds in the epic evidence for its theories, reminder that great literature exceeds any single interpretation. But perhaps the epic's strangest modern incarnation is its role in the 2003 Iraq War. Saddam Hussein, who claimed to be Nebuchadnezzar reborn, also identified with Gilgamesh, commissioning paintings of himself as the ancient hero. American soldiers, given pocket guides to Iraqi culture, learned about Gilgamesh as part of understanding the cradle of civilization they were occupying. The epic became both propaganda tool and genuine cultural bridge, its story of friendship and loss resonating across the divides of language, religion, and politics. The epic has also become a touchstone for discussions of cultural heritage and ownership. Should the Gilgamesh tablets in the British Museum be returned to Iraq? Who owns stories that predate modern nations? How do we balance preservation with access, scholarly study with popular appreciation? These questions mirror the epic's own concerns about what survives and why, what belongs to individuals versus communities, what debts the present owes to the past. The eternal return. And so we come full circle, like the epic itself, ending where we began. The walls of ancient Uruk are still visible from satellite photographs, their outline preserved in the sand, like the world's largest signature. Archaeologists debate whether these are the actual walls Gilgamesh built, or later reconstructions on the same foundation. the distinction matters less than the continuity. For 5,000 years, humans have been building and rebuilding on this spot, each generation adding their layer to the accumulation we call history. The Euphrates River, which once flowed beside those walls, has long since shifted course, leaving Uruk stranded in the desert, like a boat run aground by time's receding tide. Yet the city refuses complete erasure. Wind-scoured brick still bears traces of fingerprints from workers who shaped them. Pottery shards still carry the curve imposed by hands on spinning wheels. The ziggurat's eroded mound still dominates the horizon, a human-made mountain that aspires to heaven while sinking into earth. In this eternal return, we find the epic's deepest wisdom, not the false immortality Gilgamesh sought, not the physical preservation he briefly achieved with the plant of renewal, but the cycling continuity of human effort and human story. Each reader who encounters the epic becomes part of its immortality. Each scholar who adds an interpretation, each translator who finds new words for ancient thoughts, each storyteller who adapts its themes to contemporary concerns, adds another layer to the accumulation that is the epic's true monument. The final words of the epic, in most versions, simply repeat its opening, describing Uruk's walls, its dimensions, its districts. This circular structure suggests that the story has no true beginning or end, that we could start again immediately, that Gilgamesh's journey is not linear progress but eternal cycle. And perhaps this is the last gift the epic offers those seeking rest at the end of day. The assurance that stories, unlike lives, can always begin again, that what ends in darkness can dawn into new light, that the walls we build with our words and memories might outlast the walls we build with our hands. Sleep comes eventually to all, as it came to Gilgamesh when he tried to stay awake for immortality's test. But in sleep come dreams, and in dreams, the dead live again, friends embrace across the void, and heroes succeed in impossible quests. Tomorrow you will wake to mortality's demands, but tonight, in the space between waking and sleeping, you can walk with Gilgamesh and Enkidu through cedar forests that still grow in the imagination. You can stand on walls that crumble to dust, but remain perfect in memory. You can touch the deep that the hero saw and understand, if only for a moment, what it means to be human, to be mortal, to be part of a story that outlasts its tellers. The epic does not end with the end, but with an invitation to begin again, to return to the walls of Uruk, to meet again the king, who was 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, to wrestle again with questions that have no final answers. In this eternal return lies both the epic's power and its peace. Nothing is forever, but some things return forever. And in that returning, in that cycling between loss and renewal, between forgetting and remembering, between sleeping and waking, we find not immortality, but something perhaps more precious. Continuity, connection, and the quiet comfort of stories that outlast their tellers, bridges of words across the abyss of time. Thank you for trusting me to guide you through these historical reveries. May ancient peace settle over you like a gentle blanket.